Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. I am the head of partnerships for Third Academy. For those of you that are new to Third Academy, we are a Web3 education collective for talent that is transitioning into or growing their careers in Web3. And following the end of our third cohort for Web3 marketers, we have started an interview series with people in the Web3 space, specifically in marketing domains that we really admire. And so I'm very, very pleased to welcome Emmanuel Aremu today, who is the Growth Marketing Manager for Phi Labs. Emmanuel, before we begin, I would love to just give you a moment to introduce yourself and also your work at Phi.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for having me on. Honestly, I'm really happy to, here to share information with everyone. Yeah, so I'm the growth marketing manager at Phi Labs. And Phi Labs is a private corp that is a core contributor towards the Archery Protocol. And Archery Protocol essentially is a centralized smart contract platform that rewards developers who deploy into Cosmos ecosystem. And essentially, I joined in April and kind of been wearing a lot of marketing hats. So anywhere from content, PR, event marketing, social, and obviously growth campaigns as well. So it's been really full on, but really exciting times at Phi Labs.
So maybe just as a first question, could you let me know what made you want to work in Web3?
That's a good question. I guess it was like my own curiosity. So after DeFi summer happened like a couple of years ago, I was really fascinated about the space. I had friends of mine who actually worked in the space as well. And they just kept on telling me, look, you need to get involved. There's a need for marketers within Web3. I'm like, what the heck is Web3? Like, is is this some new code name or something? But then I was able to do my own education and dive into a bunch of Discord communities and communities on Telegram to really understand the landscape. And then I just started to experiment with different, whether it's set up my own MetaMask, play around with different DeFi protocols, and obviously really understanding exactly what's going on in the space. I thought, okay, there's a clear need for marketers in the space to kind of communicate, some of these amazing product dApps are being created to a wider audience. But either stuff was way too technical or the user experience was god awful. And I really thought, okay, how can I, jump in board and really kind of add my expertise and lens to things to kind of get even more people excited within Web3 and obviously bring more people into Web3 overall. And that's what I really wanted to dive into is really how best to equip, whether it's developers, founders, people who are participating and using different protocols overall. Like, how can I kind of accentuate and accelerate that? And that's what I've kind of dove into.
Amazing. And what was your path to actually landing your first role? I think that was at Porta.
Yes, in terms of landing a role there, the founder reached out to me essentially, and I kind of took it from there. But it's really for me, I think what helped me got me over the line was more importantly just really making sure like I communicated like I really cared about this space. I really wanted to dive into this space overall. So I was already actively using a number of DeFi dApps and obviously experimenting and kind of breaking down how different projects are approaching marketing within the Web3 space overall. So that kind of enabled me to get over the line. But it was my self-learning, educational journey within the space. And obviously laying on top of that, my marketing experience kind of helped me get me over across the line there.
Amazing. And so you mentioned that actually the founder reached out to you for your first role. So I'm kind of curious, what experiences did you carry from what you were doing before into that position? And do you have a sense of actually why they tapped you?
I think what really helped in terms of bringing over my experience from like Web 2 to Web 3 is really just ensuring that, back to the basics, really making sure you're communicating the value proposition of the particular, dApp, wallet, whatever you're basically trying to promote within Web 3, really making sure you're communicating that value proposition to end users, to other people who want to collaborate with you in the space. That's definitely what I took over from Web 2 is like clear lines of communication, really making sure like there's on the website information, socials is really up to date and really again helps people understand exactly what you do. So it reduces layer of friction and obviously helps get the conversation going. But also I think moving from Web 2 over to Web 3 is again it's just really making sure you understand the basics of segmentation, audience segmentation. I think is very key because there's so many. Obviously, when you layer in tokens as well, there's so many different participants in your project, whether it's, token holders, whether it's developers you were trying to onboard, whether it's, other projects that want to collaborate with you. So you really got to think about what messaging, what call to actions do you need to present, and then what touch points do you need to present that to a particular audience members that you're looking to target as well. I think that's definitely something I was able to bring over into Web3.
Great. And so you just talked about kind of audience segmentation as something that you were able to carry over from your previous role and sort of helped you be successful. What are key differences that you would reflect on in terms of what it means to be a Web3 marketer versus a marketer working for a startup in any other domain?
I think Web2, I'll kind of give like an anecdote. I remember specifically when I was working for Web2 B2B SaaS startup, and the founder, when I mentioned to the founder, actually we should really invest in community, like we should, like have online forum, we should like do community events. The response I got was like, "There's no ROI in community. Why would I even bother?" But we shift that over to Web3. I think it's definitely, a really key focus of like the community is the engine from a word of mouth perspective, from a recruitment perspective, which I'll touch on in a bit, and also more importantly from a feedback perspective as well. Your community is essentially your first line of call, and I think if you adapt to basically making that shift, or basically instead of you thinking of like my email list, my people who download my app in Web2 are basically just like they're just customers and these users, and shifting that to like in Web3, mainly putting the community at the heart of what you do. I think that's definitely the shift that is something that most people need to pay attention to. And the main difference, obviously, between Web2 and Web3, at least in my eyes, because that shift has so many different has so many knock-on effects about how you do your marketing, how you approach building, and obviously how do you even go about communicating to such a diverse number of characters within your overall community as well.
Great. And when it comes to communities, what are aspects and dynamics in Web3 communities that marketers and growth marketers really need to have in mind in order to be successful?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's understand who is in your community and why they're there. I think it's very, very important. Understanding that question will help you understand, okay, how best to, because once you understand the answer to the question, you have a better indication of how you want to go after getting the right people into your community. And ultimately help you tailor what you're trying to do to kind of engage your community as well. Word of mouth is tried and tested as as toast or a toaster. It just works. So really making sure you're creating programs, initiatives, collaborations that engage the community, that educates the community, inspires them as well. I think you get to that point by understanding exactly who and why they're there in your community. And also just don't be afraid to kind of really tap into some people who are really exuberant and really excited to kind of be a key member of the community. There's, previous project I worked for, and obviously at Phi Labs right now, there's been many people we've onboarded into ambassador programs, people that we've actually, been really, really helpful for referrals, for jobs as well. So it's really important you tap into the amazing resource of a community, because people are just taking their free time out to kind of share what you're building and share what you're doing with other people. And I think that's ultimately a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Great. And actually, we hadn't necessarily discussed this before, but I'm curious, are there any particular sort of tools or tactics that you have employed in your Web3 marketing roles to understand your community, figure out the health of that community, and really kind of nurture it?
It's more qualitative and quantitative. So there's different ways of, obviously, I have to default to Discord. People have a love-hate relationship with Discord. It's tumultuous right now with me in Discord. But ultimately, just really making sure you dive into the analytics behind that and really get a good picture of like where people are based. And obviously, as you configure your Discord, you get a good idea of like, if you assign different roles, you get a good idea of like who is what type of person running your Discord. So whether it's a validator, developer, someone who's a founder, or just someone who's a participant. So it really goes back to configuring your Discord to match kind of what data you would like to see from there. And the qualitative example is really just like having sessions. I just have call outs to the community, say, hey, you want to get a good understanding of the community, just here's a short survey. It's completely anonymous. Please share your feedback and whatnot. And that gives you a good inclination of like, okay, this is why X and Y. Small sample size, it really depends on the size of the community. Really good inclination of like, okay, this is what people are joining our community for. And there's different ways of like approaching doing that particular ask as well. And obviously having some swag at the end of that is probably a good way of like onboarding people into that as well.
Okay. And maybe just shifting gears from community for a second, the Web3 space moves so incredibly fast. So, how do you actually keep up to date with developments that are relevant to you and kind of your work in Phi Labs? And then, how do you think about picking kind of, I guess, the best strategies that you see out in the market and adapting your approach based on the changing Web3 landscape?
Yeah, in terms of how I keep up with everything, don't sleep. No, please do sleep. Sleep is important. But mainly it's just really just tapping into different Telegram groups. So I'm in a Web3 growth marketers Telegram group. That's been really helpful just to see what other people are up to and ask any questions and get any referrals for different people to work on and even just bounce ideas around growth like strategies and whatnot. That's really helpful. Also joined a bunch of Discord communities, not necessarily for like marketing sake, but just to keep a temperature of like what people are doing. I think is really fascinating to look at what other projects are doing for how they approach marketing, how they approach, for example, ambassador programs, grant programs, how they approach like product releases. Like I'm always like I have a swipe file of like every key product release. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then like really think of okay, how would I approach it? How are they approaching it in that particular instance? Just to build up that resource of ideas of like how to communicate to relevant people within your community as well. So that's how I generally tend to keep on top of things. But also just I'm a long-time suffering podcast addict. So I listen to a plethora of podcasts. So from Unchained to Milk Road to Milk Road is a newsletter, tons of podcasts, Unchained, Bankless, Empire by Blockworks, and a few other NFT podcasts as well, just to make sure I'm getting a good idea of like what's going on in the marketplace, and really just to make sure there's so much news. It's particularly impossible to keep up with it by yourself, and making sure like I follow the relevant news sources and publications on Twitter and sign up to the relevant newsletters so I can understand exactly what's going on. Because I mean, even as we speak, there's probably gonna be like one or two key big announcements coming through. So like yeah, Web3 and crypto just never sleep for.
Okay, so sleep, but also kind of stay up to date and leverage all of the resources around you. And
Yeah, exactly.
actually, kind of maybe peeking into your swipe file, are there any particular projects or individuals that you really, really admire in the Web3 space and why?
Why individuals, not off the top of my head, but like projects for sure. I think how Uniswap goes about things, I think is pretty cool, and especially like they're kind of OGs, but they're still relevant in that particular regard. I do like how Solana approaches their developer marketing. Their Hacker House series is pretty cool, I have to say, and obviously the likes of Polygon and Near. I think they're definitely approaching things on at scale, but also making sure that they're targeting the right people as well. So I think those are the protocols that come to mind from a you know L1 perspective. In NFT space, that's a good question. I think am I saying it right? Doodles. I think Doodles. I like how they approach marketing their particular project. It's definitely a lot more fun, interactive, and yeah, I think that's definitely one NFT project which I'm like that's pretty cool overall.
And you mentioned that Solana, you really admire the way that they approach their developer marketing. Is there something specific that's really hooked you there that you think is unique and different?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at having run a hacker house myself, it's a lot of like, event planning in the background to bring things to fruition, but also just like their whole hacker house series. So they're literally going to key Web3 cities across the US, across the globe actually. So literally they're having a whole summer tour, and like it provides opportunity for developers to come forward and kind of showcase what they've built on the actual chain, but also more importantly, it allows people to make connections. That's a secondary impact of actually doing like really being smart about your event marketing, making it just not just okay. Here's the outcomes of like we want dApps to build on top of us. Yeah, that's fantastic, but you really want to make sure even if someone's just coming in to just be a participant or be able to like absorb the information around that particular event, that they felt like is an experience that they go tell their friends about, or they make sure they sign up for your newsletter to make sure they come to the next one. And really, that whole experience from start to finish, they do really well from announcing it all the way through to people participating, and obviously at the end when people are presenting the stuff that they've built on Solana during the course of that particular account series as well.
Cool. And I wonder, you come from a bit of a VC background, right? So you were probably already used to looking at startups and teams and kind of how they were approaching the market and seeing where they're different. Do you think that that has helped you in meaningful ways when you look at the Web3 landscape?
I'm smiling. Yeah, so in terms of the VC background, so I was a part of a angel investment group for a good part of 4 years in the UK, and I was invested in like underserved like communities. Was able to do a couple of investments in some really stellar startups, and that really just exposed me to like the whole VC angle. So, was able to, recommend startups of VC firms, as well as I was also part of a scout program for the better part of about 2.5 years. So it introduced me to like what goes on behind the scenes with VCs. So when I see certain action of VCs and what they do with Web3, I'm like, that looks familiar. And it really has been helpful. It really has been helpful in terms of understanding, okay, what are the funding dynamics of a project, especially if you're looking to join a project as well, is really understand what are the funding dynamics. Like, is there a competitor of the project you're looking to join as a graduate of the program? Is there a competitor in the space that's recently raised? How does that impact the startup, the project you're looking to join? And obviously, just having to think of okay, if and having to think about the tokenomics and unlocks, like how does that going to impact your token price and whatnot? I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as well, because if token price dips, obviously that's negative sentiment of the community. So how do you strategically think about that management piece as well? And more importantly, just the framework of a VC is like they're trying to get 100x, 1000x return, and how do you try to deliver that in your as a marketer in a project you're joining is something to consider. It's not something you have to think about day and night, but just something to consider when you do get certain instructions from Matt, like from the CEO or from the C-suite is like, maybe that's coming from, oh, the investor told them to do X, Y, and Z, and this is why I need to deliver X, Y, and Z as well. And once you get that bird eye view perspective, you start to understand, okay, this is why certain things happen within the space as well. But I am shocked about some VCs' behavior in the space, to be honest with you. Yeah, it's really having friends of mine who work at different projects, and when VCs dump a token, that's not the nicest. But they're supposed to be committed for the long term, so it's really interesting to see that happen. And that was definitely something that was new in terms of my Web3 journey for sure.
Yeah, I guess you just really don't see those dynamics in kind of the traditional VC market, right? Where
Yeah,
there is no early path,
absolutely.
so you don't necessarily get that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's more like it functions more like a marriage. Like 7, 10 years, you committed in Web2.
Exactly. So just maybe as a kind of final question, because we're coming to our time, what are the developments in the Web3 landscape right now that have you the most excited? And how do you think they're going to impact your work as a marketer?
Developments most excited. I think for me, it's really, and I've seen this because of my like Web2 startup experience. So I worked across a number of different startups. So I'm familiar with different developers across the board. For me, the most exciting thing is really that onboarding piece, that on-ramp piece, right? For moving developers from Web2 to Web3, because that exposes, all these different protocols to so many brilliant minds around the world from different backgrounds as well to really build cool, amazing things. So that like, taking a Web2 example, apply to Web3, when you look at the advent of the App Store, that moment I think is coming for Web3, but it's not quite there yet. And when that channel that allows people to actually, bring their work to fruition and kind of accentuate and get that to many people's hands as possible, I think that's the next development. And there are projects working towards that overall. But generally, the educational piece around getting, developers, creators, founders into the space, I think that's the next thing that's going to be really exciting because it just brings so much ingenuity, which can't quite predict, which is the most amazing thing about marketing is like really thinking of like really just trying to amplify the amazing things that people are creating to the audience they're trying to reach. That's how I did tend to view marketing. And I think that moment is coming for Web3. So whether it's, different projects focus on educational piece, like I mentioned about Solana around hacker houses, even at Phi Labs, we're building up our series of hacker houses as well to really onboard amazing people to create amazing things, and not just developers, as marketers as well, finding right opportunities within the space as well to kind of help communicate really technical protocols to people who might find that in everyday use case as well. I think that could be really, really fascinating. So yeah, just really educating the next generation of builders, creators, founders, developers globally is going to be really, really cool. I mean, like it'll be funny to look back in this a couple of years time and see like billions more people are building within Web3 and kind of accentuating the core ethos and values of Web3 to even more people. So I think that's really, really fascinating. But on that note, I think the most important thing is, and it's tried and tested, just keep it simple. Keep it simple in terms of communicating, the core value of a project to, anyone trying to, use it or be a participant or builder of it. I think that's the most important thing. And keeping it simple, it doesn't just mean less words on your website. It's also more importantly, the user experience. Like, I think me and you can quite attest to played around with some interesting dApps, some questionable user experiences. So really making sure that, as a marketer, you are thinking about that and really thinking about ensuring that the end user has a really seamless experience. And that's something which isn't just a marketing job, but it should be on the top of mind because you want to make sure anyone who interacts with your project has the best experience possible, essentially.
I think keep it simple is actually some beautiful advice to end on. But would you have any kind of parting words for someone who is where you were when you took on your first Web3 marketing role on how they can ace it? Anything that you wish that you would have known?
In terms of acing it, I'll definitely say learn as much as possible, dive as much as possible into the project you're actually working on. And if you haven't quite necessarily landed a role at a project yet, it's just really just show your initiative, join communities, contribute. Like there's so many communities and projects out there that need a little bit of marketing help. Just create some blog posts recapping stuff, just show some initiative, and obviously you can use that and add that to your CV to kind of help you stand out overall. I think more importantly, just again, if you're looking for roles within the space, just literally just type crypto jobs marketing on Twitter and really just follow people who regularly post in openings. I know at Phi Labs we've got a number of marketing roles open, so yeah, just reach out to me or just follow us on Phi Labs, Phi_labs on Twitter. And we've got literally a list of roles that need to be filled as well. In terms of like, what I would like to have had when I started, it's a good question actually. Wow, I'll think back. I think more than anything is to know that it's okay to let go of some Web 2 nuances. So it took like a month or two for me to adapt fully to Web 3. And at times I was holding on to some core things I held on for Web 2. So it's okay to hold on to like, the fundamentals of like, running a campaign, segmentation, making sure you're tracking the right metrics and whatnot. That's perfectly fine. But more importantly, have an open mind. It probably would have saved me a lot of headaches earlier on. So definitely have an open mind when it comes to Web3 and be collaborative as well. Like my Telegram is just full with different people I'm collaborating with, whether it's, community stuff, marketing campaign stuff, events. So it's really just have open mind and be collaborative. I think that will definitely help you avoid the headaches that I had earlier on as well.
I love that. And you've already mentioned how people can find Phi Labs, but if someone's listening to this and wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that and where should they follow you?
Yeah, sure. So hit me up on Twitter. So it's EAREMU, so all one word. And just drop me a message. I'm more than really willing to help out. My DMs are open. There might be some opportunities elsewhere I might be recommend to you guys as well. So honestly, like just drop me a DM on Twitter. If I'm not responsive to Twitter, message me on LinkedIn. I know LinkedIn's old school, but message me on LinkedIn as well. More than happy to help out and give any recommendations and tips anyone needs as well.
Thank you so much for your time, Emmanuel, and definitely do reach out to him because he is awesome. He's given me some fantastic advice and been extremely generous. So thank you everyone for listening, and thank you, Emmanuel.